everyone, here is my tutorial on how to make the Lizzie dress by Bonnie Blue Designs. I'm making the sleeveless version and it's quite an easy make that is easily dressed up or down depending on your fabric selections, and as always all the materials as well as the timestamps are linked below. So to get started, you'll have 2 yoke fronts cut on the fold as well as 4 yoke backs. Then you'll have 1 skirt front cut on the fold and 2 skirt backs. With all the skirt pieces, I put little notches to mark the placement for those pleats. I made them 1/4 inch in length or less so they wouldn't go into the, allotted 1/2 inch seam allowance. And finally, I got some pieces of 2 inch wide bias strips, and these will finish the armhole under area, and I will explain more on that later in the video. So to sew the bodice, just put the yoke front right sides together with the yoke backs and sew along the shoulder seam. And repeat the same thing for the lining of the yoke, and then iron all those shoulder seams open. At this point, I put the yoke front right sides together with the yoke lining. Making sure that everything was lining up, I put some pins to keep everything in place. Also, I folded the yoke lining up about 1/2 inch since that's the seam allowance. And this folded area will be hand sewn later to enclose the raw edges from the waist seam. So go ahead and sew along both armhole areas, if you will, as well as the neckline. You'll start from the back, go around the neck, and then down the other back. And when you get to a corner, just put your needle down, turn your work, and continue sewing. Then I clipped those corners as well as trimmed up the corners at the back of the yoke. After that, I turned the yoke right sides out and give everything a really good ironing. And I used this pointer tool, which is linked below, to push those corners at the back into a nice, neat point. And now that the yoke is done, you can move on to those skirt pieces. So let's start with the back piece, since those just have top stitch pleats. You'll first want to mark the pleats, and as I mentioned, the top of the pleats have been marked with a small clip in the fabric. So I'll mark the bottom of the pleats using this friction, whatever it's called, pin. It's linked below. And at this point, you've got 2 points, and 2 points make a line, so you know where to sew. Just match up the clips at the top as well as the 2 dots at the bottom to create the pleat. And you will want to fold every pleat away from the center of the body. Or in other words, they should all be folded towards the side seams of the dress. Then just stitch on top of the fold and you've got yourself a pleat. And you will repeat this for all of the pleats except for the center pleat in the front of the dress. This second line right here is a stitch line for that center pleat at the front of the dress. So I went ahead and marked this by itself and then just stitch along that line. Then I opened up that pleat and gave it an ironing. You can see that the pleat matches up with the marks on each side, and this is called a box pleat, FYI. My favorite kind of pleat is an inverted box pleat. I put them all over my wedding dress. But anywho, after marking the rest of the pleats and sewing them into place, then I trimmed up those threads and gave everything a really good ironing and sewed the skirt front to the back pieces using French seams. And I have a detailed video on how to sew French seams that is linked below. You'll want to press those seams towards the back of the dress, and then you can finish the back of the dress. The entire back just overlaps, so there's no seam there. So I turned the edge under about 1/4 inch and gave that an ironing, and after sewing that down, I turned the whole thing about 1 inch and then gave that an ironing. And doing the back edges like this means that your stitches won't show from the right side of the dress. And then this flap will get secured down by whatever buttons or snaps you use to close the dress. Okay, so now you just need to finish the raw edges under the armhole. To do this, I folded that 2 inch wide bias band in half lengthwise with wrong sides together. And I don't worry about the length of the bands when I'm cutting them. I know that they are oversized on purpose, and such is just one less thing to think about. It makes life easier. So sew the folded bias bands to the armhole, making sure the raw edges are all together. Then I trimmed up the length of the band so it fits the armhole length. If you've seen my other videos before, you know I'm a big fan of saving all the handwork until the end whenever possible. So for now, I'm just going to iron the bias band in place, and I will hand sew it down later on. Finally, you can attach the skirt pieces to the yoke pieces. To do this, I pinned the skirt, making sure that those bias bands stay folded over. to the yoke. And I unfolded that seam, if that makes sense. You'll see there's like a little white tab sticking out past the skirt edge. I'm really glad you'll have a visual. I said collinear to the previous stopping point on the yoke. That way everything will go nicely, neatly into place when you fold over that lining of the yoke. And then you'll use those machine stitches to hand sew the lining down later. After repeating the same process for the back pieces, you are almost done with this garment. You just need to do the hand sewing, add your buttons, snaps, and hem the dress. Now, this garment is just a play dress from some leftover fabric. I've been trying to chunk down my fabric stash lately. So for the hem, I'm just going to iron it all the way around about 1/4 of an inch and then up again about 2 inches. And when you fold up the hem, you can either fold the entire thing up first, which will leave you with a gap on the side of the dress, or you can unfold the back side, that back overlap area, and then do your folding, which will leave the gap at the bottom of the dress. To each their own. I'm not sure if one's better than the other, honestly. To fold up a consistent, ish, hem around the dress, I measure 2 inches, place a pin, and move over a little ways, and then measure another 2 inches, and put a pin down, and then I iron in between the pins, and that's pretty much 2 inches across the way. It is not rocket science, and it does not have to be, but since I'm going to machine stitch this, I won't be able to ease that extra bit of fabric into the hem. So instead, I place 4 deliberate fabric pleats to take up the extra fabric, and you won't be able to see them from the front of the dress. Of course, you could hem this using lace or whatever instead. It's sewing, you do you. But I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will do my best to answer them. As always, I appreciate y'all for watching, and I hope to catch y'all next time.